Hey folks, this is Ardwulf. Welcome. We're going to do a mega unboxing today. This is from our friends at Cool Stuff, who, as usual, have been very responsive in terms of shipping speed. And boy, they may have overpacked this guy just a little bit. So, but it certainly appears that whatever is in here is probably not damaged. So that's good. So let's see what we have. We're going to do a full unboxing here, which I'm going to have to film in a couple different parts because we have a wide array of packing peanuts. So let me actually move this out of the way. Of course, I already getting packing peanuts friggin' everywhere. So we have here are two things. Axis Empire's Total Krieg. And Axis Empire's Senso. So we are going to, I'm going to take a quick break here while I clean the goddamn mess up and get rid of the packing peanuts, and we're going to unbox both games. Okay, so what we have here, as you probably know, are two games in the Axis Empires series. Total Krieg, which is strategic level World War II in Europe, and Senso, which is strategic level World War II in the Pacific. They are both from Decision Games. They're both these kind of I would say, more traditional board game style boxes than one typically sees with war games. We're going to start with Senso because I've looked at it a little less online. So let's open her up and what we get. Now the designers of these are Salvatore Vasta, Alan Emmerich, and Thomas Prowell. Salvatore Vasta is, of course, also known as the designer of Unconditional Surrender, which I have some video on if you want to check it out. And actually, Sal chimed in the comments on one of those to explain all the stuff I was screwing up. So these are not as dense, we'll say, as some of the other big box Decision games. But nevertheless, they're relatively dense. Okay, so we've got some shrink-wrapped materials here. We got a bag of baggies and a die, a yellow die. It's because somebody's a racist. And we got some counter sheets and rule books. So let's open these up without destroying them, preferably. Now, there are updated versions of the rule books for both of these games at the Decision Games website. There's also a Vassal module floating around. If you search for Axis Empire's Vassal module, I think you'll come up with it. But for whatever reason, it's not on Decision's website. Normally their stuff, wow, that's a thick book. Normally their stuff, when they do electronic versions of the rules, you get them off Decision's website, same with the Vassal modules. So here's the Senso rulebook. It's a 64-page book and quite hefty feeling. Quite thick paper, black and white. I've looked at these, of course. They're not what I call profusely illustrated. It's a pretty dense rule book. Nevertheless, I don't feel like the game is all that complicated by the standards of strategic level World War II games. If you want to see playthrough videos of these, by the way, Callendale has a big playthrough series of both games played together, so check that out. That's well worth watching. Here's a scenario book, which for some reason is on totally different paper. This is on sort of a semi-gloss or even glossy paper. And this is 24 pages with some page and a quarter of designer's notes on the back. There's a fair number of scenarios in these games. So Senso, I believe they have the same number. Senso has 3 training scenarios, which kind of stage you into more and more complicated iterations of the game. August Storm is, forget what it is. Tora is the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, of course. The China incident is part of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And then there's campaign games. There is one map campaign game, which is the Sino-Japanese War. Now, one of the cool things about this game, and with Total Krieg, is that it actually starts, or can start, in 1937, where you do some pre-war stuff to try to build your scenario. Now, the expansion kit, which has been announced and is up for pre-order on Decision Games' website, will have a complete random campaign generator where you can generate events clear back to World War I at least. We have here is a player aid card, support unit and convoy marker aid card. So the naval rules in this game, for those of you who remember games like World in Flames or Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun, where the naval rules for Rising Sun were a little more involved than the ones for Advanced Third Reich. This kind of doesn't do that. It gives you a little more, but not a ton more. So I think this is for tracking the status of the European war if you are not playing it with Totaler Krieg. Here is a fold-up player aid card. What do we got here? We have sequence of play, we have an attack sequence, supply effects summary, the CRT, blitz combat. So this is a card-assisted game. I'll get to that in a minute. Some special rules. Here's a War of Resistance scenario display. And here is a political events table. We'll get to that when we talk about the cards. Obviously, this is not going to be a rules summary. So this one is the Soviet faction aid card. This is the Axis faction aid card. That's interesting. This is, so we don't get a scenario thing in there. But we do have some decisions that you can make. I'll have to read that. That's interesting. Online, you don't have access to any of these player aids. So Western Force Pool with conditional events. That's kind of an important deal in this system. Soviet Force Pool, Axis Force Pool. Here's the Western. So it's a three-sided game. There's the Soviet faction, the Western faction, and the Axis faction. And obviously the Axis and the Soviets, the Allies, the Western faction, and the Soviets can be played by the same player. I would say particularly with Senso, because, I mean, you've kind of got the little tail end of the Soviet Union on the east side. So we got a ton of cards here. There's two big bricks of cards, one for the Western, and what looks like one for the Soviet, one for the the Axis. Not 100% sure how that's broken up. I'm not going to open these right now. So this is kind of a card-assisted game. The cards do things, right? They're not just like tools to mark what action you're doing. But you don't really have a hand, or rather, you have a hand that is the entire deck of cards that are available to you at that time. So there's sort of three phases: a limited war phase, or I should say a pre-war phase, a limited war phase, and a total war phase. And when you switch phases, then you'll get more cards in your deck. So there are pre-war cards when you're in pre-war. When the game is in a state of pre-war, you will have only the pre-war cards available to you, and most of the cards have preconditions on them as well. So we also have two counter sheets. This is not like a super huge counter-heavy game, which surprised me a little bit. I expected, I mean, I knew it wasn't, there wasn't a ton of counters, but this is it. Two counter sheets. That's really pretty compact for a game like this. There are two maps. And so I took a closer look at the counter sheets, I guess. We've got the Soviets in this sort of brown, which is an interesting choice for them, but it matches what they have in Totaler Krieg. We've got some various minors here, which I can't really read. A bunch of these are the individual Chinese states. We have up here, we have the Commonwealth, the U.S. in sort of a light, very light green. And we get almost closer to a whole sheet of Japanese. And we've got some more minors here. This is the Philippines, for example. This might be Mongolia. I'm having trouble reading these in the current lighting. I had to turn a light off to get no glare on the shrink wrap. So just two counter sheets. So not a back-breaking number of counters to clip or store. And it comes with two maps. Now this is weird because typically Decisions games will just have this one fold because they have these big flat boxes. And these are Joe Eust's maps. I really like his map work. Here's China. Nice size play area. This map, this is the Western Pacific, or the Eastern Pacific map. The East map. This is folded conventionally. I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if I got like a replacement map. I guess I don't care too much because it's going under plexiglass anyway. That's a little weird. So that's the entire contents of Senso, the Pacific War part of the system. Give me just a minute and I will be back to talk about Totaler Krieg. So we're back with Axis Empire's Totaler Krieg. Again, same designers, Alan Emmerich, Thomas Prowl, and Salvatore Vasta. This game got started as a game called just Krieg. And this was, I want to say, back in the early 90s or something like that. And and it went over pretty well. This is, I know lots of people, including myself, have reservations about decision games, but I mean, I looked into this, and this is a pretty polished game. You might have issues with them, and I think there is plenty of reason to, but in this case at least, this game has gone through 3 or might even be 4 iterations now. And while it's not errata-free, the errata is pretty minimal. And what we have is a really, I think, nice integrated package of these 2 games cover the entirety of World War II in both the Pacific and Europe without crazy rules density or massive counter density, or even, although the map area is actually quite decent size, without even a huge footprint for what it is, really. It's about the same footprint as A World at War, though. Alright, so in the Total Krieg box, we have 2 big decks of cards once again. And again, these are like option cards that represent political events and strategic decisions, but you're not really limited. You're limited by the prerequisites, but you don't have a hand. There's no random draw of these. They're just actions that you can take that are in addition to the actions that you take on the map. Set those aside. We got another little baggie of baggies and another die, blue this time. And we have another shrink-wrapped packet of rules and such. I kind of like that they do this because you know this is going to rattle around in this big box, and I would just as soon the components, including the counter sheets, not get wrecked. All right, so once again, big thick rule book. This is not quite the same rule book, but I can tell you from having looked at both online versions, most of the rules in these 2 books are the same. It does tell you specifically where there are changes. There's a little copyright symbol that marks, for example, things that you do differently if you're playing the quote-unquote Axis Empires game, which is both Senso and Total Krieg together, versus just playing the one. Here we have another scenario book. Again, this is the same sort of semi-gloss paper, 24 pages. The online version of this scenario book does have an additional scenario that they couldn't squeeze in. You got, again, a nice selection of scenarios. So you get Case White, Invasion of Poland, Barbarossa. You notice Barbarossa is a training scenario. Very manageable in this game at this scale. The Fall of France. You've got some one-map games, Far in the East, the Great Crusade. Far in the East would be, of course, the War on the East Front, the Great Crusade in the West Front. And you've got a pile of 2-map campaign games, 1 in 37, 38, 39, 40, 2 in 41, 1 in 42, and 1 in 43. And I want to say that the one that's in the online version, I think, is in 44. So I've looked at the scenarios. The scenarios are nice and clean. They look pretty tight. There's none of the sort of mess I've seen in a few other things by decision as far as the scenarios being impenetrable to set up. And we have actually no designer's notes here, but I think we will see them in the back of the Total Krieg rulebook. So I had, back in the day, I had the first edition of Total Krieg, which was sort of the second edition of Krieg. And I liked it. I never got to play it, so I got rid of it. Not necessarily a decision I regret, because then they came out with this version, which is more polished and it is more complete. So again, we have a support unit and convoy marker aid chart. I am not at all familiar with this end of the rules, so don't really feel like commenting on that. We got a force pool card. These are on, again, medium weight card stock, I'd say. You know, the cutting on the one side of this looks a little tight. I don't know. I could be nuts. There's a Western Force Pool card and display. Here we have, once again, a Soviet faction card, the Axis faction card. I would imagine that these are mostly the same. They see these events and stuff and decisions are going to be different between the 2 games. So these won't be the same. And then the Western card, Soviet Force Pool. And here is a turn track. How's it? Oh, this is for one of the scenarios, actually. That's cool. There is a turn track on the map. And okay, so this is for the Fire in the East, which is the Eastern one-map scenario. This is for Crusade in the West, or the Great Crusade, which is the other one-map scenario. Soviet Force Pool card, and we have 3 counter sheets here. So here we have, as you can see, you can pretty much predict what the colors are for the most part. So this sort of washed out looking Feldgrau is the Germans. We've got the French, we've got Belgium and Holland, which not really sure I see what the rationale is here. At scale-wise, it probably makes sense for lumping them in as one sort of minor country. Norway and Denmark are handled the same way. The Italians are in this lovely banana yellow. We've got black SS. Here we have more Russians, Great Britain, Commonwealth, and U.S., pretty much matching the same colors from Senso. And here we have our minors and some markers. You also notice there's not a crap ton of markers on this game. It is not a marker-heavy game. And almost none of these markers go on the map. All this stuff, well, most of this stuff, is all stuff that gets put on the status displays. So you're not going to have like monster stacks in this game. Pretty much you're going to have, I think the stacking limit is at least on the European map, I believe, is 6 steps. But if your units are mostly 3-step units, it's only 2 counters. And like I said, there's not a ton of informational markers in this, which is another thing that I think is relatively attractive. Also true, by the way, of World in Flames, which I should probably do a video about at some point, why I got rid of my World in Flames stuff, even though I basically like the game. But I don't want to talk about that now. So again, we have 2 maps, and in this case, they're both sort of the 11x17 folds. Here's the eastern map. Again, I don't really have room to drop all these and show you everything, but here we can see the middle section, or the northern section of the Eastern Front. These highlighted hexes are strategic hexes. These are basically the objectives, and we can see that there are different colors. So these are Soviet controlled, or they are Soviet objective hexes, and the Soviets, and actually, I'm sure you can see it, over here we have a gray objective hex. That's an Axis objective hex, and it's Warsaw. Axis don't control Warsaw at the beginning of the game, so if they don't take it, then that's a point that they're missing. The victory conditions in this game are a little complicated. There's sort of this point balancing system that I don't feel like I fully understand, and I feel like I won't fully understand until I actually set it up and start fooling with it, which I might do in Vassal, actually, because I don't right now have room for even a 2-map game, let alone a 4-map game. So here's the southern half of the western map, and there is some, again, naval and air are very abstract, and that's one of the things that the expansion kit is going to contain is Krieg, which is going to be the naval and air expansion. So here we have a very expansive Scandinavia, Great Britain. London, you'll notice, is in green. It is a western objective hex. I hope you can see that on the map. If not, let me move it up just a bit, because Brussels is one as well. And again, Berlin is gray. What is this? Posen. Why would Posen be an objective and not Danzig? That's interesting. I'll think about that later. Oslo is a western objective hex. And here we have this rather large turn track, which is actually an interesting turn track. So the game can actually extend into 1948 and starts in 37. So you actually roll all the way down to the end of the track, and then you start back at the beginning in 1943, which is interesting. You've also got a Pacific War display to track the status of what's going on in the Pacific if you are not playing Senso along with Total Krieg. This is all very self-contained. I gave this a good look. I was kind of waffling about, well, I want a strategic level World War II game, but I want something that's more manageable than what World in Flames eventually became. I don't want to pay an absurd amount of money to pick up something like, I can't even think of an example. Well, actually, World in Flames would be an example, considering what the whole thing costs nowadays. I didn't want to run down Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun, and I didn't really want to take the plunge on a World at War. Even though I liked Advanced Third Reich and Rising Sun, and actually still do quite a bit, I feel like, having looked at the World at War rules, I feel like it's more than I want to deal with, and I'm somebody that tends to like heavier games, so I think that means something. Just didn't really want to, just didn't really feel like I had the stomach for it, and I like the level of strategic and logistical abstraction present in these. And like I said, these look to be, don't let decision games scare you off on these particular titles. I think they're pretty solid from what I've seen so far. Haven't played them, but I have watched Callendale's playthrough, and I have read the rules about 80% and have a pretty good sense of how this plays, and I'm predicting I'm going to be pretty happy about this. So stay tuned. I've got one, possibly 2 or 3 more unboxings headed your way, and we have additional content en route to the channel as well. Thanks for watching. I will see you again soon.